We're live in Chap Peterson's Senate office on the 5th floor of the new Pocahontas building. And Chap got the corner office with the windows. Biggest office here. That's why I get to broadcast live from his office here in the General Assembly. And he is with us right now. It's government shutdown day. It's going to be another fun day in Congress. Rob Wittman, he's on the line. Republican Congressman, District 1. Chap, Rob, what a day we're going to have. Chap, thanks for having me. It's always good to be here.
John, great to have you here. And, yeah, we do have a nice view. You can see the James River on one side and Churchill on the other side. So great day in Richmond.
Rob Wittman never had an office. Anything like that.
Well, he didn't stick around. He moved somewhere.
He went to Washington, D.C. I just got back from there today, and he's with us now. We got Chap Peterson on. Look, Congressman, oh, my goodness. So you guys passed the continuing resolution last night, along with funding CHIP. How many Republicans didn't vote for it, and how many Democrats did in the House last evening?
Sure. Well, there were 11 of us that voted against this continuing resolution. And, of course, John, as you know, I've been very consistent along the whole line that continuing resolutions are not the way for us to do our job in Washington. As you know, we need to get that job done back in July. So there's plenty of time so we don't have these crisis moments now. It seems like every 30 days. And this is no way to run a government. In fact, it was very compelling. Yesterday we had a hearing on these ship collisions where it resulted in the loss of life of sailors. And the Secretary of the Navy said this. He said, the most destabilizing thing we deal with are continuing resolutions. And he says, in the past 9 years, just the Department of Navy calculated what it meant to the Navy, and it meant the loss of $4 billion. And he said, that's not just moving $4 billion. He said, that's putting $4 billion into a trash can and lighting it on fire. When I asked the Chief of Naval Operations about how disruptive continuing resolutions are to the Navy and the things that they need to do, he said on a scale of 1 to 10, the disruptive effect and the interference in what the Navy needs to do in its basic mission, on a scale of 1 to 10, he said CRs rank an 11 in what it means just to that element. So we see the impact that it has on the military, and that reverberates throughout government. Congress needs to do its job so we don't get to these crisis moments, it seems like now, on a regular basis. And, you know, John, I've been an advocate for years to say, get the job done on time. Chap, you know, up there on the General Assembly, you know, you got to get this stuff done. And unfortunately in Washington, the dysfunction is keep kicking the can down the road. And that's where we are. Needless to say, the continuing resolution passed. There were 11 Republicans that voted no. There were 5 Democrats that voted yes. So now it's over on the Senate side. There are individuals in the Senate that have indicated that they will vote no if they don't reach at least 60 votes to begin to debate and vote on final passage of the bill. Then we're faced with a shutdown scenario. Of course, that doesn't occur until midnight tonight, and then with that situation, then it's back and forth, I'm assuming, through the weekend to try to find some resolution to this to be able to actually get the government funded. But again, it's tremendously frustrating because all of this is avoidable, and all of these things need to be done on time. If appropriations bills done, at least the House this year got its appropriations bills done, but prior to the end of the fiscal year. But it really goes back to that. And we shouldn't be in a situation of holding all these other elements of necessary legislation hostage to the funding bill. And listen, we need to address DACA, but along with that, we have to address border security. We have to address ending the visa lottery program. We have to address ending chain migration. All those things are critical, and the American people expect us to do all of those things, not just one of those things, but all of those things, and not to hold up the elements of what need to happen with the government in order to get these other pieces of legislation passed. So, but this is where we find ourselves. So the Senate will have the opportunity this morning to begin debating and voting on cloture, which is just their motion to be able to go to debate and vote on final passage of this temporary funding measure known as the continuing resolution.
Let's get Chap to weigh in here, Chap. I mean, very different here in the General Assembly.
Sure.
You have a timeline to pass a budget. They can't get one done in the Senate. They can't get one done in Congress in D.C.
Sure.
But then you've got, and I really want to get Chap to weigh in on this, both of our Democratic senators in Congress, Tim Kaine and Mark Warner, said they're going to vote no on this because they don't like the fact that DACA is not included, although CHIP is included for a 6-year extension. But I've had them on my show during the other shutdowns. And I mean, Mark Warner came on one day and his hair went on fire. He went crazy over the negative economic impact that it was going to have on Virginia, and he blamed the Republicans. Now he got the shoe on the other foot, and he's saying the opposite thing. How do you figure this out?
You know, John, I've sort of been on both sides of these politics for government shutdowns. I mean, in 2004, we had an overtime session where we literally were up against midnight for not funding our local school divisions, and Mark Warner was proposing a tax program. It had increases, it had decreases, but the Senate, which was led at that time by John Chichester, who I'm sure Rob remembers well, had aligned itself with the governor, ironically, and even though the Senate was Republican controlled, and basically they would not agree to pass a state budget until we enacted this tax bill. And at the end of the day, the House blinked, which is to say the House majority at that time, I guess Vance Wilkins had stepped down, so maybe it was Bill Howell. But we went right up against it. And so, you know, you get a lot of this brinksmanship, and, you know, like I said, I've been on both sides of it, and it sounds familiar to me. The only thing I'll say is that at least here in Richmond, you know, our sessions are limited to 60 days, and I got to get home and make some money because I'm not supporting 4 kids on $17,000 a year. So, you know, we can do about 60 days of this stuff, but then we got to quit. But those guys, y'all go full time.
So,
well, Chap, I tell you, you know, we need to be, you know, following a similar course in Washington. I think that if we don't get a budget adopted on time while we go around the year, I think if we don't get a budget adopted on time, there should be a single member of Congress that gets a paycheck. And it's very similar to what you're faced with. You got to get the work done so you can get back and actually earn a paycheck. It ought to be paid for performance in Washington. Shouldn't get a paycheck. If you don't get appropriations bills done by the end of July, then you shouldn't be allowed to go home for this August recess, which is essentially vacation. So no vacation, no paycheck unless you get your job done. There ought to be members of Congress that actually have to have a little skin in the game, have to sacrifice if they don't get the job done. Unfortunately, that's not the case today.
Yeah, I would also say, Rob, and again, I'm sure you know this better than I do, but the safest position in politics is to be on the losing side of an issue. And so if there's a vote and you're on the losing side, then, you know, things go on. If there's any negative consequences, you don't take the blame for it. If there's positive consequences, people typically forget you were against it in the first place.
Yeah.
We're live in Chap Peterson's office here at the General Assembly on the 5th floor, Democratic Senator from Fairfax, Chap Peterson. And we're also with Man of the Hour, Rob Wittman, who is a Republican congressman from the 1st District of Virginia. That's the kind of central Virginia, Fredericksburg area, and up through the neck. And he is with us now also. Congressman, let's again get to this shutdown. So here's my question. The Republicans need 60 votes to get this House bill passed. They're not going to get that, and that's not going to happen. The Democrats are holding it up because of DACA, which isn't even in deadline. That deadline is 2 months out. Plus, you've got a judge in San Francisco that blocked Trump's action, canceling them. They can't get deported anyway. And you guys have passed a 6-year extension for CHIP. What is the argument? How do you not blame the Democrats for this?
Well, John, I think the bottom line is this. This is a must-pass piece of legislation, funding the government. So it, unfortunately, through the years has become the mechanism to try to attach other things to it. You know, we ought to keep it to the debate that it is. And the debate about spending, if we go back to, you know, we hear all this effort about DACA, but really the basic back and forth on this funding bill is making sure we properly fund the military, and those of us there believe that it ought to be at a minimum a base budget of $634 billion. And then the debate is, well, if you're going to increase spending there and step outside of the caps put in place by the sequester, another, you know, bad public policy decision. If you're going to do that, then the push is, well, we have to have more non-defense discretionary spending. That ought to be what the debate is here. What are those numbers? Let's negotiate and come to that to actually get this done. You said it right. There's plenty of time. Even if you look at the expiration of the executive order by the president and don't take into account the ruling by the court, there's still plenty of time to get that done. It's an unfortunate part of what happens in Washington is one issue is held hostage by another. This is one of those must-pass pieces. So I think the thought is as well, let's go ahead and attach it to that. Let's expand this debate, which really should be about what we're doing to fund the government. How much do we put in defense? How much do we put in non-defense? That can be a realistic debate back and forth. I think there's an easy place to get to lift the sequester cap so we can get spending decisions made. But unfortunately, now this debate gets expanded into DACA, which, as you said, is not time sensitive like funding the nation's governmental operations and our military. So the two shouldn't be tied to each other, yet we find ourselves in that position where they are.
Okay, so what is going to happen tonight? Are we going to get this thing shut down? I mean, I'm on CNN tonight from 11:30 to 1 on a watch, right? So they've got a couple panelists there. So, I mean, the clock is going to strike midnight. Is this thing done? Is there any chance for a compromise? Congressman Wittman, what do you think?
Well, I know that Leader McConnell today is going to be doing a lot of back and forth with both Republican and Democrat members. So they're going to be working on this all day long. From what I understand, there'll be multiple series of votes. So I imagine there'll be a lot of discussion. There'll be a lot of efforts to say, what do you need in order to vote yes? That's a normal part of the process of the back and forth, the sort of horse trading. It's not something that I think ought to be part of it, but it is part of it. So I think that's what will happen today. Whether they reach an agreement, and I certainly won't reach an agreement on DACA, but maybe they can reach agreement on some other ground rules to be able to say, here's the path we will chart in order to get a DACA agreement done at some point in the future, and then at least some element about how they will reach a budget cap deal. It's possible for them to get it done by the end of the day. It's all a matter of what does each individual need there in order to vote yes on the bill. As you know, yesterday there was a lot of back and forth with a number of members about what they wanted to see happen in order to vote yes in the House, and those things took place, and there was a lot of back and forth even up to the minute of the vote. And I suspect the same thing will take place today, John, in the Senate. There'll be a lot of conversations back and forth with Mitch McConnell and other members there as to what they need to pass this continuing resolution.
Okay, Congressman, I got to get to another topic while Chap is with us because I want to get him to weigh on this one. And this is the FISA court memo that was sent to yourself. And I know it's under confidential cover, so you have to manage what you say on the air. But this FISA court memo that is circulated, that Peter King, your colleague from Long Island, has called to be released. And allegedly in this memo, what it says is that a FISA court judge was presented with evidence to sign surveillance legislation on Mr. Trump and the Trump campaign during the election season. And the evidence that he was provided allegedly came from a fake dossier, opposition research on Trump and his Russia connections that was paid for by first the Democratic Party, then the Hillary Clinton campaign, and that assumedly the judge signed this under false pretenses. We don't know who presented that to him or how many people did that. Along with this, now we hear that Samantha Power, former UN ambassador, is saying, look, I didn't unmask all these people. I didn't do it. Maybe there were one or two. I didn't do all this. So now your colleagues are saying, well, wait a minute. If she is telling the truth, Samantha Power, former UN ambassador, then that means that somebody feigned her, used her credentials, unmasked. I mean, I know there's a lot of my Trump listeners out right now celebrating this. I'm not. I think if any of this is true, this is the most egregious abuse of government power for political purposes that you can be witnessed. This is the fear that all of us had with these FISA courts and everything else and surveillance. Chap Peterson has been fighting this with me for some time, but I just want to get your take and then Chap's. What's the deal with this memo? Have you seen it? Is it going to be released?
Well, John, I was having some conversations yesterday with a number of my fellow House members, including Mark Meadows, who had been there and had seen the memo. I am scheduled to go by and see the memo today, to go to the secure facility to look at it, because it is a classified document. It's a top secret classified. So, I want to be able to read it. But just in the elements involved in the alleged connection between information collected in the dossier, that being used to present to the FISA court for getting a subpoena to look further into these individuals involved in both with Trump and the campaign. Those things are deeply disturbing if indeed the connected pieces that we've seen at least being laid out are indeed the case. I want to go in and read the memo, but if we have people within these particular government agencies, the FBI, the Department of Justice, that are part of this active effort to take information that was put together by Fusion GPS, and again, with the connections we've seen there between Fusion GPS and the individuals there in the FBI, and then use that information to obtain warrants through the FISA court, those things to me are deeply, deeply concerning. Now, I want to be able to read the memo to understand the exact nature of that, and obviously, can't divulge the names or the specifics in the memo. But if indeed these connections are there, then yes, we need to take action, and yes, the public needs to be aware of this. And I think that you could probably make the substance of the memo available to the public. I believe in transparency. Make it available to the public. You don't have to have necessarily the names and the other critical elements there. Or remember too that there's a way to go ahead and declassify these documents. So I think both of those things should be looked at with this. But I want to make sure I have an opportunity to look at the memo, which I'm scheduled to do today.
You're right on that. The American people should be made fully aware of whether there was a power abuse here. I want to get to Chap Peterson, Democratic senator from Fairfax, who with me has been fighting all of this surveillance stuff. I mean, we just got the extension passed in the Senate. There was hardly any debate on it. It also passed the House. Chap, is this your worst nightmare perhaps coming true?
Well, and John, I don't want to rush to judgment. I don't know the facts. And to be honest, I haven't even read the paper this morning. And I always listen to the sports on the radio, not news. So I'm probably a little bit late to the party. Maybe off air you can give me some more details as to what judge signed off on the warrant and what were the circumstances. I've always been very wary of giving widespread discretion for wiretapping, for any type of surveillance, computer surveillance. Obviously, we've had legislation. I've sponsored legislation that would have very severely limited the ability of Virginia State Police and local police departments to, for example, use license plate readers or others, remote surveillance devices without a warrant. Here, if they got a warrant or if there's some probable cause, I'd like to know what it is. Again, if it's mixed up in a political campaign,
right.
I mean, the idea that you would get a warrant against someone, against a political campaign or an operative, is troubling to me.
Right.
At a minimum, you'd want to wait till the campaign is over.
Right.
So you're not in a position where you're trying to influence the merits of the campaign itself. But again, I can't really say. I know less than Rob because, first of all, I don't look at legal documents if I'm not getting paid. That's the difference between me and Rob. But other than that, I don't really. I mean, it's troubling to me. Again, I do strongly believe that people have a right of privacy, and to the extent that the judicial branch gets involved in campaigns,
right.
At a minimum, I think it ought to be outside the cycle.
Well, you know what, Congressman Wittman, that judge, we don't know who it is. We may find out one day because the judges are secret for a reason. But I tell you, that judge right now, if any of this is true, has got to be looking at this and be really mad, because the evidence, according to what I've heard, is in the memo, and it's all speculative. You haven't seen it. But according to it, apparently, allegedly, that the information provided to the judge in order to gain his signature on the FISA warrant was opposition research paid for by opponents of Trump, the Democrats, and then the Clinton campaign. I mean, this is really troubling when we get government officials at that level abusing power to this degree. And then, Congressman, you got the whole Samantha Powers issue. I mean, I don't agree with Samantha Powers, but I've always respected her as a straight shooter. And, you know, she's saying, I didn't unmask these people. Well, if you look at the records, it was her credentials. So if she didn't unmask them, then somebody got her credentials and went in and did this. I mean, this could be a scandal. I mean, we're talking Watergate times 5, times 10. Bad news, right? Bad news if it's all true.
Exactly. Well, if all these fragmented pieces that we're looking at now have those links to them that potentially are there, then it is tremendously impactful and I think deeply disturbing. As you've spoken about, you know, we need to have the utmost trust in our government. There need to be checks and balances there. I don't believe that they exist within the FISA court process, and I understand wanting to keep things secure for reasons of national security, but I think sometimes you can step too far in the other direction where individual liberties and freedoms are trampled upon because of that. And if the pieces that we've seen here, again, I want to be able to get all the information to be able to establish, you know, one connection to another, but if those connections indeed exist and there's an abuse of this system to gain an influence or to use this information against the folks in a political campaign, then yes, it is unbelievable that would occur in a tremendous abuse of power, in an invasion of individual liberties and freedoms, and now using those elements that are meant to keep the country safe, using them as a political tool. That for anybody, I don't care where you are on the political spectrum, that ought to deeply disturb everyone out there as to the potential for that to happen. And if indeed it does, it needs to be fully prosecuted to the full extent of wherever the evidence leads us, and for individuals to be held accountable, and for this to be divulged to the public as to exactly what happened, how it happened, where things broke down, and where problems were. But again, you know, we need to let the elements of due process play out here to make sure we clearly establish that. But shining sunlight on this, you know, divulging this to the public is what needs to happen, because if you don't, then you raise suspicions, and people then don't feel confident that indeed their government's operating above board and without suspicion. And the way you do that is to make sure that you divulge exactly what's happened, how it happened, and who's involved.
Congressman, we're out of time. I want to thank Congressman Dr. Rob Wittman for being with us. More information, wittman.house.gov.